Welcome to the Embodiment Conference. This is truly an epic event that is raising awareness and revealing just how much is happening in the world of embodiment. And this gives me hope about where we're heading as a people. I'm Amara Pagano. I'm the founder of Azul, a conscious movement path of personal transformation. I work with the body and the power of movement to awaken love and consciousness. Embodiment is a key to my work, and the journey of embodying the map of Azul is what facilitates the process of self-realization. I'm excited to sponsor the Dance and Creativity channel to share my love of movement and to celebrate the power that it has to serve our collective evolution. If you are interested in awakening your deepest potential or curious about the spiritual and healing aspects of embodiment, I encourage you to check out Azul. Everyone is welcome. I work with people who love movement and people who have never moved. Follow the link and you'll find 3 gifts for you: a 50-minute Azul journey, a special discount on our online embodiment training, and a free month in our upcoming membership program. So come, check out the Path of Azul. I'll be presenting on the main stage here and in the Dance and Creativity channel, and I hope to see you there. For now, enjoy the richness of the presentation you're about to see.
Today we have Emily, is it Jeanne Brown or Jeanne Brown? Jeanne, okay. Emily Jeanne Brown running a session on building embodied community through virtual arts events. So Emily is an actor, musician, and embodied voice coach based in Brooklyn, New York. She draws on a range of techniques in her coaching, including Alexander technique, Middendorf Breathwork, Kristin Linklater and Cicely voice work, Michael Chekov method, and classical singing techniques to help her clients become better embodied communicators. So Emily, I'll hand over to you. Just to let everyone know, if there are more people that want to come into the room, please click the raise hand button and I will bring you in as the session begins.
Great, thank you so much. So I just want to take a moment to, before we begin, just introduce myself. I'm Emily Jeanne Brown, and I want to mention before we dive into the topic today, which I'm so very excited to chat with you all about, to just acknowledge that the lineages of nearly all the modalities that I draw from as an embodiment practitioner trace to non-Western and indigenous cultures, both from the land where I live and what's now the United States and around the world. And although I personally have come to most of my direct mentors and teachers through Western institutions, and many of them are actually white folks who teach these modalities, I just want to mention that there is a multi-layered history of colonization and co-opting of culture that plays into how I came to this work in my life. And I don't have all the answers about how I engage with that, but I just wanted to mention that I am in that journey and that I think it's vital that we all as embodiment practitioners at least ask those questions, engage with that truth of where these lineages originated, of whose culture we are perhaps borrowing from, and that we not shy away from it, but we let it inform and guide our work. And so with that said, I'm leading this session as a guide, as a person who wants to share what I have learned from my experience, but certainly not as an authority, and not with any presumption that I am not part of a much larger whole that also includes all of you. So thank you so much for being here today. Great. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Let me see. Where did my screen go? Sorry about this, guys. Let me pull this up here really quick. Okay.
Is it giving you an option when you click? Oh, there we go.
It was on there and then it went away, but it's back. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your patience. So today we're talking about building embodied community through virtual arts events. And my name is Emily Jeanne Brown, as I mentioned. I am an actor, a singer, a songwriter, and an embodied voice coach and consultant. And in my coaching and consulting practice, I help individuals and groups improve their communication, their collaboration, and leadership skills in person and in virtual spaces. And to do this, I use embodiment tools taken from my professional actor training and my singing training, as well as the daily mindfulness practices that have really supported me and my emotional well-being and my mental well-being as a freelancer and a professional artist, which if any of you are freelancers or artists, you understand what I'm talking about and how these things can be crucial to staying balanced, staying grounded in kind of a crazy career path. So for me, being a practitioner of embodiment, being an artist, and being a member of my community all go hand in hand, and they cohesively inform my values and the actions that I take every day. Some of those things are the power of storytelling, the importance of collaboration, utilizing the body as a foundation for effective communication and authentic expression, and investing in the human imagination and in human creativity in order to transform human experience. By which I mean, and I want to be really clear on this, for people to experience personal transformation that leads to actionable behaviors that challenge systems to create real equity and justice and transformation for all people. So it's not just an internal transformation or sort of a personal transformation, but it's something that really is driven by our values and that affects positive change in the world. So how I came to embodiment, as you know, I studied dance, theater, and singing from an early age. I developed a yoga practice during my first long regional theater contract, and I was really living alone for the first time in my life. And this at-home yoga practice really helped to ground me and sort of keep me in relationship to myself as I was doing that work in the theater for the first time professionally. And then in my grad school experience, I came into contact with Alexander technique, with different modalities of physical theater, and breathwork, which really informs my coaching and consulting today. And one of my great mentors is a wonderful teacher named Jeff Crockett, who developed a voice and breathwork model for actors that was drawn from Middendorf Breathwork, as well as his training in Alexander technique and other modalities. And working with a small group for 3 years under the tutelage and mentorship of Jeff was really kind of a profound experience for me. Building that intimacy, energy, and presence with them in that work really challenged the way that I thought about human behavior and how relationships and creativity and positive change can develop. It challenged me to look beyond my intellect to understand how presence and embodiment can really influence those things. So for me, this work began as a way to deepen my skill set as an artist, but I quickly realized that these tools are tools for living, right? And to me, art and life inform each other in so many different ways. I quickly realized that I really wanted to be part of helping other people to access these tools, not just artists and not just people who were in wellness spaces, but everyone. And to be able to see more aspects of their lives as opportunities for creative thinking and for transformation. So when I work with clients, I really hope that they are able to sort of embody that role of the artist in the way that they approach their lives, that they become aware of their own power to create meaning and affect change. So I'm just going to stop my screen share for a minute here. And so in that spirit of sort of embodying our power, the power of intention to transform experience, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I perceive as the opportunity of this moment and how we can engage with virtual spaces in a more embodied way. And then I'll go a little deeper into breaking down how we can think about building virtual arts events and also how we engage in and attend virtual arts events in a way that fosters a stronger sense of connection and engagement, and hopefully also can actually build community. So for many of us who are in the coaching field, I don't know, are any of you also coaching, doing embodiment coaching work? I know, Eve, you work with clients virtually a little bit. Great. So for some of us, this virtual space and working remotely is maybe a little more familiar. In the arts world, however, and especially in my country, in the US, The inability to gather physically because of this pandemic has obviously been a huge blow economically, but also just emotionally. It's been devastating to the arts community to not be able to physically gather. And so as an artist, I'm interested in ways that we can use embodiment to reframe the limitations of the pandemic as opportunities. So opportunities to look closer at why we gather around art, to ask again and again and again, which I think is important for artists, what is art for? Why do we do art? To look at what's working institutionally, and then also what needs to change when we come back from the inability to gather, especially in the American theater. And if you're interested in learning more about that, there's an amazing petition going around called We See You WAT, W-A-T, and that stands for White American Theater. And it's a list of demands from BIPOC theater artists to the American theater. So it's really some wonderful resources to check out to kind of get a sense of where we are with that conversation in the US. And then also, I think this is an opportunity to reflect on what is essential about art making and art consumption. Like, what are the real core essential things about art? And then really to ask the question of whether the inability to publicly gather robs us of that or not. If we can actually access what are those really essential things about art and art making and art consumption without needing to physically gather. And I don't know the answer 100%, but that's what I'm curious about with this presentation. So at this time, I was in my script, it says, I'd love to bring in my brave volunteers, but some of you are here already, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for joining me. The first thing that I just want to say to those of you who have joined me in this virtual space that we are in, is to acknowledge that we are meeting in this virtual space. We are not physically in the same room, but we're all listening to my words, including me. We're feeling the vibrations of my voice. We're all watching with some degree of concentration, both the folks who are on camera right now and also maybe the folks who are off camera. And we're sort of gathering mentally around the ideas that I'm sharing, right? So we're not physically together, but that we are gathering in some way. And then the second thing we need to acknowledge is that this virtual meeting is not going to feel the same as an in-person gathering, and we shouldn't expect it to, right? So, because if we expect it to be that, we actually rob ourselves of the opportunity to learn and to grow from the unique kinds of connections that the virtual space can offer us. So we actually can kind of get connected to each other by connecting to ourselves in this moment. That's sort of my thesis with how I talk about virtual gatherings with clients and virtual presentations. And that's where embodiment comes in, right? So it's different than sitting next to a stranger in a theater, which brings another kind of feeling of togetherness, but it actually is perhaps less of an intentional awareness that we're collectively building. So you are all over the place. We have someone from South Africa, we have someone in Alaska, I'm in Brooklyn, and yet here we are in this virtual space, and we can feel our physical bodies, each of us, and we can look around into the behind us at the room that we're in, and also connect this way. So let's just start for a minute to get a little deeper with that by just doing a short embodiment exercise. And I'll just ask all of you to make yourself as comfortable as possible in the chair that you're sitting on. If you need to grab a pillow or make an adjustment, if you're in a desk chair and you want to adjust up or down, just feel your feet on the ground, connecting to the floor. You can gaze down on your feet, taking your eyes away from the screen, but still aware that the screen is here. Feel your sits bones on the chair. And then the hands resting gently on the legs. And you can have the palms down if you want a more of a grounding feeling, or up if you want to bring in a little more vitality and light energy. And we can just meet ourselves in this moment by connecting to those 6 points of contact, the feet, the sits bones, and the hands. And if you don't have 6, if your points of contact don't add up to 6, that is okay. We're just finding places where body meets solid matter or body meets other body parts, and sending our attention there. And just begin to let the breath drop into the body, noticing the breath coming and going on its own, recognizing that we don't have to do anything to it, but that it just moves in and out of its own accord. And it does that for us every day, 24/7. And so as you're connecting to these 6 points of contact and now sensing the breath and how it's moving, I just want to invite you to see if you can connect with a quality of your breath. Today, does your breath feel shallow or deep, really subtle or more dramatic, a little jagged, a little sticky, or really smooth? Just see if you can connect to, if your breath were a substance moving in and out, what would it be? And connecting again to the 6 points of contact, or however many points of contact, your feet, your sits bones, your hands on the legs. And now as you connect to the quality of the breath, I'm going to borrow one from my friend Eve, who's joining us today, and see if you can give 2% more of your weight to the chair. So allow your exhale to expand and bring some of that upright, wakeful energy. And then with your exhale, see if you can just release tension, maybe in the stomach, maybe in the hips. Just give 2% more weight into the chair by releasing a little bit of tension in the body. Nice. And now in just a moment, we're going to transition from this quiet, or maybe it's not quiet, maybe it's quite tumultuous in there, but whatever's going on for you internally in this space that you've cultivated and connected to, we're going to transition from this internal space to both the physical space of the room we're in and the virtual space connecting with others through this screen that we're looking at. So not yet. Stay in your little cave for a minute. And in a minute, I'm going to invite you to open your eyes and just allow the visual information to come in as if your eyes are windows, and resist the need to reach out or connect through the screen. So whenever you're ready, just try that. Just open your eyes gently. And we're just going to allow the information to come in. So I just felt a sense of almost like a blanket of energy that kind of washed over me. My nerves before the presentation are now sort of melting away. I have a sense of quiet that I've cultivated internally. And I'm also able to see and greet all of you and take in the details of the room while staying connected to myself. So it's that transition moment from one space to another, right? From an internal space to a virtual space to a physical space, how we treat that transition. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in relation to the journey that we take physically when we go to an arts event, and how we can sort of adjust that when we're thinking about how we enter into a virtual space to engage with art in a virtual arts event. So before we do that, I just want to invite you all, and I think you can do this yourself, to unmute if you are willing. And we're just going to have a short little opportunity here to, from this space where we've cultivated some grounding and we're still meeting each other, to just chat a bit about what art is about for you. And it's a big question, so don't feel like you need to give your ultimate answer, but what just comes up from this space of staying grounded and being here together in this virtual space, why is art important to our lives? Why is art important to your life? And what do you get from that? So if anyone would like to jump in and offer something, that'd be great.
I feel it's really central for relationship because it's coming from the heart.
Beautiful.
So in this household, we use art as a noun. So look, I did an art, or look, I did. My niece did an art. She has many beautiful arts. So we have a way of using the word art in Spanish. Makes more sense. Like in everyday speech, like look, I did this thing, and I'm calling this art, and it's art because I'm calling it so. So for us, it's like part of our lives.
Yes, I love that. So and I'm going to talk a little, I mean, I think I already kind of mentioned that idea of being the artist of your life, that art doesn't have to be constrained literally to a piece of art, but that different aspects of life can be engaged with that way. Like cooking can be art, and, you know, architecture and community and all of those things. Yeah, beautiful.
For me, art is the intensification of the everyday into the things that matter most. So it gives me a sense of life is focused, with a focus, purpose, and connectedness.
Yeah. Beautiful.
For me, art is staying connected to the beauty. Beauty and the ability to, I think in English you say the awe, to be surprised.
Yeah.
There's a Norwegian artist who said that art is not something you can do. If you could do it, it wouldn't be art. And I feel that art is about being able to express externally and find some kind of an expression of internal gesture, internal impulses, internal kind of messages, and externalize them and make metaphor and representation externally of an internal world.
That's beautiful. And I almost feel like that's sort of like saying art is like the embodiment of things that are immaterial, right? Expressions or, you know, feelings or qualities that can't be materialized any other way but those types of creative expressions. That's beautiful. Eve, do you have anything you want to add?
One of the reasons, the first thing that comes to me about like why is art meaningful to me is just that it's an opportunity to see the world through others' eyes and see their perspective and see what is important and meaningful to others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Well, thank you. I appreciate all of you sharing that so much. And I agree with everything that was said. And I'm going to go back to oops, it did it again. I'm so sorry, you guys. So part of what I talk about is having a human relationship to technology, which sometimes results in less streamlined situations. So give me one moment to pull this back up for you so that we can continue. Let's see, go away. Okay. Great. Okay, there we go. All right. So some of the things that I came up with were very similar to, you know, what you all mentioned. And I just want to kind of quickly talk about what I was reflecting on as I was preparing to ask these questions of what are those essential things about experiencing art that we can maybe still connect with in a virtual space. And so one of the things that came up for me was this idea of a temporary escape, right? The ability to step outside of our daily experience and an immersion. Also just sort of cut and dry entertainment, right? Which is not to say that it's, you know, less valuable, but really a way to sort of dip into something else and then come back into the real world with a fresh perspective. It's also can be a very private, very intimate experience in a public space. This is in terms of like a live event, I would say. There's an intimacy, but also an anonymity to that. You're having an emotional experience alongside other people, and there's a sense of togetherness. There's also a pilgrimage to the theater, so there's a journey involved in a physical gathering, and we're going to talk about how that translates into the virtual space. I was watching a interview with Hillary Clinton, who's an avid theater goer, and she was talking about culture preceding democracy, right? So that the arts and culture tend to sort of reflect more progress, and then democracy or the political space sort of catches up to what the culture is dealing with and talking about. So a precedent for change, ideas about how our society could be. Collective witnessing. So historically, we've always come together to witness things both gruesome and beautiful. So oral traditions, storytelling around a fire, festivals, public executions, gladiators, Greek drama, and so forth. And there's some sort of sense of affirmation of shared cultural beliefs and traditions. And then this is the one that I sort of always come back to, which I think was kind of mentioned in our little discussion here, which is connecting ideas to make meaning, right? So the artist's role is kind of to connect the dots of our human experience, of our human existence, in order to sort of make sense of, or perhaps just to ask the question, to engage us about the mysteries of being human. So how do people feel about virtual arts events? I'm curious to know if you want to put it in the chat. I don't know, can I see the chat if I am here like this? But I'm curious to know either you put it in the chat about whether you have attended a virtual arts event and what it felt like to you. And I'd be curious if it was surprisingly engaging, surprisingly interesting, or if it felt frustrating to you. I'll just give a couple examples of ways that different art groups have addressed this. And I want to point to two tools that we have in this moment with virtual arts events. The first one is, of course, technology. And then the second one is sort of good old-fashioned human connection. So at the Hastings Contemporary Museum in London, there is a program on their website where you can actually tour the museum with a personalized robot. And you can see that in the image here. That you sign up with, and the robot moves around the space according to your dictate. So Liz Gilmore, who runs the gallery there, was speaking about how the embodied experience of being in a gallery involves moving and stopping and engaging with a piece and talking to the people that you're with. So in this way, instead of just seeing a high-res image of a piece of art, which isn't really the same thing, she's considering what is the embodied experience like, at least in terms of movement, and incorporating that into the way they use technology. Of course, this is a high-budget situation, but that's to me, an interesting use of technology. And then I also read about the Huntington Theater Company in Boston, which had a series called Huntington at Home, where staff would call up patrons of the theater and read monologues over the phone, one-on-one, to their patrons, right? And there was a quote from the article that I read that said, when one audience member received her call, she shared, "I'm so sorry if I sound scattered, but you're calling at the perfect time. My brother is very, very sick and in the hospital, and I'm waiting on a call sometime later today to hear how he's doing, so this is really perfect." So that's about intimate human connection around storytelling, which in a way there's an intimacy to that you could never achieve in a theater, perhaps, or in a big theater maybe. So that's kind of a different angle on, we can't be physically together, but we're still creating that intimacy. We're still creating that human to human connection. So this moment requires that we really just break down to the basics of what we need from art consumption and art creation in this moment. And then that we take an intentional versus a passive approach to how we engage with that in virtual spaces, which is really the definition of embodiment, right? It's like you choose to to engage, to set your intention, to connect with your breath, to connect with your body. And that actually does transform how you experience the art. So we have to consider how technology and human connection interplay and interact and converse with each other. So how do we do that? So I'm just going to go through my thoughts on how, both as audience members and as artists who are independently producing online events, or theater companies who are producing online events, galleries, anyone who's putting together an arts event online, how we might approach it in a more intentional way to shift our experience of how we engage with it and connect to one another as we do that. So the first thing that I recommend is that we, prior to the event, that we reframe. We take a moment to reframe our expectations of the event, our expectations of everyone who is involved. So the first way that we do that is we shift the ask. So as a producer of an event in a theater, we're always asking something of the audience, right? We're asking them to buy a ticket. We're asking them to show up in person. We're asking them to sit quietly and engage with the piece. In a talk back, we're asking them to then respond. So in time, how do we shift the ask? What is the ask? Maybe it goes from, show up on time, sit, buy your ticket, enjoy, and then go home at the end of the night. Maybe with a virtual event, we shift the ask to, I'm going to ask my audience member to find a way to engage with the theater, in the way that they experience this story. That wasn't a very clear example, but anyway, the idea is that you shift the ask, shift the expectation, reframe, right? And not sort of, again, try to replicate an in-person experience with the virtual experience. So the other thing that I really want to emphasize is shifting the idea of a pilgrimage, so a physical journey to the event, to a preparation. So the pilgrimage becomes a preparation, and that has to do with, how do we lead up to the event? How do we lead up to the moment where we open the laptop and we come into the virtual space? And if this is a reading where we're all on screen together and we're having a dialogue, how do we center ourselves before we come into that dialogue, right? We move from one space to another. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when we did our embodiment, our grounding, and then we shifted into allowing the information to come in from the screen and from our physical space. So what does that transition look like? Then, especially for those producing arts events, that we communicate with people who are attending about what the virtual space means for the piece. So that it's not just, oh, we're doing a virtual reading, full stop, but that there's some way that the piece itself interacts with being presented in a virtual space, right? That's incorporated into the art itself. We provide an opportunity to connect. So we open the lines of communication before the event, maybe find ways for people to engage with one another, connect to people who are also going to be attending, maybe create an activity or a landing page online where people can start to digest and process the event before it happens, dramaturgical materials, questionnaires, activities. How can we connect before we get into that space together? And then just to really consider and make sure that we take into account as we're planning, either as audience members or as people who are producing, that we're shifting something that was a private experience in a public space into something that is kind of a public experience in a private space. So people are accessing this event from their homes. They don't have to put on pants, they don't have to drive to the theater. And so what does that mean? What does that mean for how your audience is going to be absorbing the art that you're making, right? There's just a different experience of absorbing and witnessing something when you're sitting on your couch and you've been sitting on your couch all day working, right? So just thinking about what is that little sort of flip mean for your audience, and how can you take care of them in that, and how can you maybe make some adjustments given that reality. So then as the event begins, right, the transition from prior into the event, this transition is really important. So affirm. We want to affirm each other in the virtual space. We want to create a clear beginning. We want to establish an organized yet human relationship with our technology, which I feel that I have been doing today in my attempts to go back and forth between video and my slideshow. But we want to, bring our humanity, bring our vulnerability into it. I was involved in a virtual reading where everybody came into the Zoom room at once, and there were like 50 people, and it was kind of like a little chaotic because nobody really created a clear beginning. But there was also something really beautiful about the vulnerability of that, because what ended up happening is that people actually engaged in a messier, more human way when we then went to having a conversation about the piece when it was over. So just being aware that we can interact with this technology and let it be a little casual. It doesn't always have to be so streamlined. Meeting the audience, the other participants, and yourself by grounding. So if you are inviting people into a Zoom room, to find a way to create grounding, find a time or a space for a collective breath or a grounding activity to remind us all of our humanity in the space and to meet each other in that way. Acknowledge that the event is taking place virtually. So name that. Again, let that be part of how the art takes place, how it unfolds. And then hold space for those who may have a difficult time catching up to the new ask. So if the ask is, we want to create a community feeling in this virtual live stream concert. So we're going to ask that every audience member comes into the Zoom room to say one thing about what music means for them in this time in the pandemic. That might feel like a lot for some people, and other people might jump to the task, but just holding space for the new ask of this virtual arts event. And then during and after the event, how do we engage? So looking for as many opportunities for engagement as we can during and after the event takes place. And this is just a little bit different than it would be if we were producing a concert in a physical space or a play in a physical space, or if we were putting up an art show, right? Because when we do that, it's sort of all this preparation, all of this rehearsal, and then the event happens and people show up and they take it in and then they leave and they go home. So in a virtual arts event, we want to be thinking about how can we actually be engaging during the piece and after the piece? How can we follow up after the piece? And one of the ways that I think is really powerful to do that is to think about ways to democratize the space. So kind of get rid of the status of, the artist and the audience, or like the director and the audience, or, creating that fourth wall, but maybe inviting everybody into the Zoom room. Maybe allowing the piece to have a choose your own adventure feeling to it, or to be influenced by the folks who are actually in attendance. So kind of evening out the playing field, acknowledging that the audience, as much as the artists, are contributing to the experience in the virtual space. I already kind of went over this one, but consider incorporating the virtual platform that you're using into the piece. So pointing to it, letting it be part of it. I saw an amazing virtual reading that included so many, and I know this is happening, in all kinds of theaters, but where people were playing with space and playing with perspective and handing props to people in other windows, and that piece couldn't have taken place outside of Zoom. So incorporating the virtual platform that you're using into the piece. And then holding space for honest and vulnerable feedback. So following up with folks. And this goes for if you're an audience member or if you're the person in charge of producing the event, right? So it's about keeping the lines of communication open beyond just the event that takes place. So not just having it be a flash in the pan or an event in a vacuum, but that there's a way in which you follow up with those who are involved there. There's a dialogue that takes place. There's some interchange between the artists and the attendees of the virtual event. So at this juncture, that was a lot of talking. So I'm going to bring us back to our room. And I'm just curious to know if, let's see, I'm looking in this, now there's so much in the chat going on, and I kind of want to check back in with you all because I wasn't able to see this. So let me just scroll up here. I'm reminded of how our physiology does not know the difference between what's real and imagined. And so the online experience could provoke physiological responses that are exactly the same as if the experience was happening in a physical space. So not to replace the real thing, but work with what is possible beyond the limitation. Yeah, absolutely. Our physiology doesn't know the difference between what's real and imagined. Wow. That's interesting. Eve mentioned she's watched some live music events, and though it's not, of course, not the same as live music in person, she appreciated the live aspect of it, knowing others were listening to the music at the same time. Exactly. So sometimes it's just about, like, instead of getting like, oh, be in the chat, let's chat together and be, you know, chatting on the chat. Because I feel like sometimes that people go to that as like the way we communicate on Zoom or the way we communicate during a live stream. Maybe it's about stepping back, taking a moment to sort of see how many folks are also watching, and then just sitting with yourself, right? And connecting to your breath as you're experiencing the music, knowing that there are 50 or 100 or 20 or 5 other people also doing that as well. And yeah, there's a part of me that believes that even doing that energetically changes the flavor, the experience of the stream for everyone. Maybe that's like a little too woo-woo, but I do think that can, it definitely has an effect on your experience of how you watch, and I think can help us connect more to what we love about music, what we love about watching live performance. Let's see, I've run improv groups online with everyone involved physically, challenging initially as there was no model for it. Great. And that's another thing, when you are actually leading like an arts event or an arts workshop, to get people physically activated as much as possible, to get people away from their screen and moving, right? And human, and connecting to movement and connecting to the physical space that they're in, and then coming back together to connect here, but not feeling like we have to be stuck here, but we can actually engage with our physical space is huge. Now that I think about it, I've been reluctant to attend stand-up or shows or concerts because I sort of fear it won't be the same, which is exactly what I hear from my students. Yeah, and I think that's the point, right? Is that it won't be the same. And so, you know, I hope that maybe some of the suggestions here can help us sort of shift into focusing on what we really love and what we want to support in these events, and can change the way we think about engaging with them. Great. Can you share who and what events you find exciting that use some of the principles you are sharing as a model for what can be? Oh, who and what events you find exciting? Oh my gosh. Well, this is the question where I have to act like I know stuff. What I will say is that there are so many innovative things happening right now. And I know that in the theater, which is sort of my space, there's a lot of great stuff happening. The public theater is doing really great readings online. But to be honest with you, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I've been bouncing around and experimenting with in sort of non-arts related virtual events, actually. So I don't have a list that I can run off for you at the moment. But what I would say is to get curious about what's out there. And if you are connected with arts orgs or theaters or particular artists, to just get curious about what they're working on and look into it and connect with them around it and ask them how it's going, you know, and engage them on what would be interesting for you. Because I know that, especially in the theater world, I'm connected to a small theater in the Bay Area in California who are creating a whole virtual season next year. And they're trying to get folks to sign up for memberships. And they really want to be the storyteller for their community. And I think that it's possible to be that without having people in a theater. But it's hard to sort of, again, have people shift the ask, get to a point where they're like, oh yeah, I can still support my local theater. I can still hear interesting stories. I can connect with artists in my community. And I don't have to go to the theater to do that. So it's also kind of getting people out of their habits. Great. Okay, so I'm gonna allow now Jamie, I guess, to quickly just jump in. Maybe we'll have time to answer one or two questions that are in the Q&A. If there are there other questions in the Q&A or?
Not at the moment. People are mostly writing in the chat. Nothing's popped up in the Q&A yet. There's
Great.
a couple of questions just come in there.
I had someone say, I live in the Bay Area. What theater is doing the online event for the season? So this is the Aurora Theater Company. And I'm so glad that you asked because I actually love the folks at this theater. They're really wonderful. Yes, Aurora Theater Company. Perfect. So you can look them up and check out their season. One of the cool things that they're doing is they're producing 2 audio dramas. So instead of doing just the virtual readings, which they're also doing, they're looking at how can we bring commissioned storytelling from local artists, both actors and playwrights that have been commissioned, to a different format, to a different medium. And it's, orally listening to the storytelling, which is something that we actually do. A lot of us listen to podcasts, right? We listen to, but it's like we don't connect that mode because it's not the same as sitting in a theater. But by supporting those endeavors, we are continuing to show up for the artists in our community. So yeah, I would recommend checking out Aurora Theater Company for sure. Let me see. Oh, okay. We have Kathy is doing improv and she can connect with you on LinkedIn. Awesome. That's really cool. Great. So we have someone saying they're looking forward to attending a play in live stream and curious to see how it turns out to be. And how do you manage time delays? Oh, time delays. Yes. You mean like as an artist performing or just in general with Zoom managing time delays?
I'm thinking about we have multiple actors
Mm-hmm.
or bringing participants in to play with improv. Sometimes there's a little bit more delay, because different people have different formats they're working out of or different amounts of Wi-Fi they have capacity for.
100%. So what I would say is that when we're doing improv in a room together, or we're doing a reading in a room together, and we're working with rhythm, we're working with pace, right? We're working with picking up our lines and sort of tossing the energy from one person to the next. This is now an opportunity. It's a little bit, feels a little disconnected, but this is an opportunity to challenge that. So there's a rhythm to the delay, right? So it's kind of like, let's think of that as another layer of the exercise, or let's think of that as another layer of how we think about the rhythm of playwriting. I mean, famous playwrights are now writing for this format. So how's that going to affect the way that writers think about pacing, the way they think about language, the way they think about actors being able to overlap each other or not, right? I think that we think of it as a challenge that can be something that nourishes us rather than something that makes us feel like, oh, well, we can't approach it. And just to approach it with a sense of humor and an understanding that we're all in this and it's a little awkward for everybody, but that's live theater too, right? Like to be in the moment and dealing with the given circumstances and to try and create some truth out of that. So that's what I would say to that. And it's 5:50. So Jamie, I don't know if maybe we should wrap it up now.
Hello, we can start wrapping it up. I have another question for you though, if you don't mind me throwing a question into the mix. What are your thoughts on, obviously, I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the adaptations that are happening because we're moving into this Zoom world and people are adapting according to that. But like once we start to move back into normality and as things were, what do you think the role of these virtual events are going to be? Like something that will go alongside in-person events to sort of amplify them, or an entirely separate thing?
That's a great question. I think people initially are just going to be starving to get back into real spaces with each other. And I think it's going to be so interesting to see how that return, that mass returning to theaters and to music venues and to galleries, how that affects the new art that gets created for real life spaces. I think that the switch over to live streaming and virtual is really overlapped with accessibility and ensuring that more people globally can now see, like, now the public theater has an online, like, fully functioning feature, and I don't think they're going to get rid of that, because now people can access New York theater from wherever, right? So I think that it is something that's going to continue developing and sort of going alongside the live events that will inevitably also come back. And I think that it's a good thing, because it does increase accessibility, and it gives us more options of how we create. So yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, amazing. I completely agree with you. I've seen it already starting to happen in, fitness classes and things, where they'll do a live fitness class, but they'll have the Zoom running at the same time for those people who can't get out to the class for whatever reason.
Right. I think that that's a really important part of, like, developing our approaches to inclusion and access. So yeah. I think that's
100%. 100%. Amazing. Okay, so at this juncture, I'll just finalize with the usual comments that we make. It has been really lovely to see everyone. Thank you for the people who volunteered to have their videos on, for Emily to be able to look at your lovely faces. As always, please do check out the coffee break rooms in the Embodiment Conference portal, engage in some conversation with other people. There's often people in there looking for advice or thinking, like, what should I watch next, and that sort of thing. So, you can help people out on digesting all of this content. And of course, if you are in a financial capacity to do so, we do encourage you to upgrade to the lifetime access package. That can either be just for one channel or for the whole conference. 1,000 speakers, lifetime access, gives you lots of opportunities to digest all of this incredible content. And of course, in addition, you get some extra features like some notes and some audio only options, so you can listen like podcasts, etc. All the links to access those are in the chat. We also have a group on Facebook. There's the overall group, and there's also a group for just the dance and creativity channel, which I'll pop in there as well.
In the chat, I forgot to mention, if you are interested in accessing these slides today, or if you'd like to take a look at an ebook that actually Eve and I, who's in this window here, created together on connecting and engaging in virtual spaces, shoot me an email. I just put it in the chat, and my email is emilyjeanbrown@gmail.com, and you can find that on my website, which is also in the chat.
Amazing. I will also post that on the Facebook group and make sure people have access to all of the slides there if they want to, and include them in the notes. So I think we're basically ready to wrap up. If anyone has any burning questions, chuck them in the chat now. But otherwise, thank you, Emily, for your time. And we're going to wrap up with one final word from you. And what is your top embodiment tip?
Oh, my top tip. I think that my top tip is do an exercise or do some reflective journaling. Find a way to connect to your core values, and use those core values as you work on your embodiment, because those core values are the thing, I think, that guide you to embody real transformation in a way that is helpful to not only yourself, but to everyone around you.
Amazing. All right, well, on that note, we will close the session. Like I say, join the coffee break rooms, get in the Facebook group, reach out to Emily on email. It's been lovely having Emily and everyone. Take care, and we'll see you at the next session.